At 29 years old, she packed her entire marriage into 4 suitcases and moved back into her childhood bedroom, the one with faded yellow wallpaper and a twin bed she thought she'd left behind forever at 18. Everyone at her divorce party, because yes, her own mother insisted on calling it that, thought her life was over. 5 years later, she signed the papers that made her their landlord. Her name was Claire Whitman. She had married young, at 23, to a man named Brandon who charmed her parents at Sunday dinners and slowly, quietly, dimmed every light inside her over the 6 years that followed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment anyone could point to. It was smaller than that, 1,000 tiny erasures, disguised as opinions about her clothes, her friendships, her ambitions. Brandon had a way of saying things that sounded like concern but landed like control. "You don't really need that promotion, do you? Someone has to be home. Your friend Amanda is a bad influence, don't you think? I just don't think entrepreneurship is realistic for someone like you." Claire believed him, slowly, the way water believes the shape of whatever container it's poured into. By 28, Claire had quit the marketing job she once loved, lost touch with most of her close friends, and spent her days managing a household for a man who criticized the way she folded towels. She told herself this was simply what marriage looked like. She told herself a lot of things during those years, mostly to avoid admitting how small she had become. The end came on an ordinary Tuesday. She found messages on his phone, not the first sign of dishonesty, just the first one she could no longer talk herself out of seeing clearly. She confronted him. He didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He simply said, "You've gotten so difficult lately." As if her discovering the truth was the actual problem in their marriage. Claire filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Her parents, Robert and Linda, drove 2 states over to help her pack. Her mother cried the entire drive home, not from judgment, but from a grief Claire didn't fully understand until years later. The grief of watching your daughter come home smaller than the woman who once left full of plans. Moving back into her childhood bedroom at 29 felt like defeat wearing a familiar wallpaper pattern. She lay awake that first night, staring at the same ceiling she'd stared at as a teenager, thinking about prom dates and college acceptance letters, and now this, a 30-year-old divorce, an empty bank account in her own name, and absolutely no idea who she was without someone else's opinion of her. Her father Robert, a retired high school shop teacher, didn't say much about the divorce itself. On her 3rd night home, he knocked quietly on her bedroom door, sat on the edge of her old twin bed, and said only this. "You know, the strongest wood isn't the kind that never bends in a storm. It's the kind that bends, and doesn't break, and stands taller once the storm passes." Then he left her alone with that sentence. For the first 2 months, Claire barely left the house. She applied half-heartedly to marketing jobs, got rejected or ignored, and spent most days on the living room couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like her childhood. Her mother never pushed. She simply left tea on the counter every morning and said quietly, "Take whatever time this needs to take." The turning point came from an unlikely place. Claire's mother ran a small home-based catering business on weekends, mostly for local church events and neighborhood gatherings. One Saturday, overwhelmed by an unexpectedly large order, Linda asked Claire, almost apologetically, if she could help manage the online orders and social media page. Just for the weekend. Claire, craving anything to occupy the aching silence in her head, said yes. She spent that Saturday reorganizing her mother's chaotic order spreadsheet, redesigning a simple menu graphic, and posting 3 photos to a social media page that had 11 followers, mostly relatives. By Sunday night, the page had 40 new followers and 2 new catering inquiries from strangers in the area. Something small sparked awake in her chest that weekend, not happiness exactly, but the faint, unfamiliar sensation of being good at something again. She kept helping, week after week. She built her mother a proper website. She learned basic photography to make the food look as good on screen as it tasted. Orders slowly, steadily, began to climb. 6 months after moving home, Claire suggested something that surprised even herself. What if they expanded beyond weekend church events into small business catering, office lunches, corporate meetings, local event planners? Her mother, cautious but curious, agreed to try it as an experiment. Claire designed a simple pitch deck, cold emailed 12 local businesses, and landed 3 catering contracts within the first month. Word spread through the small business community faster than any of them expected. By month 9, Linda's kitchen table catering operation had grown into something that could no longer run out of a single home kitchen. They needed commercial equipment, a real workspace, proper licensing. It needed real investment. And for the first time since her divorce, Claire felt something other than grief when she thought about her future. She still had almost nothing in savings. Brandon had controlled most of their joint finances during the marriage, and the divorce settlement had barely covered legal fees. But she had something else now, a genuine skill set, a track record of real growth she could point to, and a business plan detailed enough to actually mean something to a lender. She applied for a small business loan, using her mother's 2 years of catering revenue and her own 9 months of documented growth as proof of concept. She was rejected twice, each time revising the plan, tightening the numbers, addressing every concern with more research than the loan officer had probably ever seen from a first-time applicant. The third bank said yes. With a modest loan and her parents' small savings as additional backing, they opened a proper commercial kitchen space 18 months after Claire had moved back home. They named it Whitman and Daughter Catering. Her mother had insisted on the name, tears in her eyes, saying, "This was never just mine. This became ours the day you stopped being a guest in your own life." The early days of the real business were brutal. Claire worked 80-hour weeks, learning food safety regulations, negotiating supplier contracts, managing staff for the first time in her life. She made mistakes, an underpriced wedding contract that nearly broke even, a supplier relationship that soured over a missed delivery, a staffing crisis during their first major corporate event. But something had changed in her that Brandon's years of quiet erosion had never fully destroyed. She no longer collapsed at the first sign of failure. She fixed problems instead of internalizing them as proof of her own worthlessness. Every mistake became data instead of a verdict on her character. This, she realized slowly, was what confidence actually felt like, not the absence of failure, but the refusal to let failure define her. By year 2 of the business, Whitman and Daughter Catering had built a reputation across the region for reliable, high-quality corporate and event catering. They hired 11 employees, most of them local mothers looking for flexible, respectful work. Claire made a quiet point of hiring women who reminded her of who she used to be before Brandon, and who she was determined to help become again. During those same 2 years, Brandon reached out twice. The first time, a vague, guilt-laced message wishing her well. The second time, after seeing news of her business's local success in a small newspaper feature, a message that read, "I always knew you had it in you." Claire read it once, felt nothing but a distant, almost clinical curiosity at her own lack of reaction, and never replied. That silence, she would later say, was the real proof of how far she'd come. Not the business. Not the revenue. The simple, quiet fact that a message from the man who once made her feel invisible no longer had the power to make her feel anything at all beyond mild indifference. By year 3, the business had grown enough to move into a larger commercial space, doubling their staff and tripling their annual revenue. Claire began mentoring other women in the area, some going through divorces of their own, some simply stuck in careers or relationships that had quietly shrunk them the way Brandon once shrunk her. She started a small monthly meetup at the catering kitchen, unofficially called Rebuild Sundays, where women could talk through career pivots, financial independence, or simply the process of remembering who they were outside of someone else's expectations. What started as 6 women around a folding table grew into a wait list of over 40 within a year. Her father Robert, watching all of this unfold from his quiet retirement, began helping too, teaching basic equipment maintenance and cost-saving repair skills to the catering staff, using the same patient teaching style he'd once used on decades of high school shop students. The business, and the family had become something neither of them anticipated, a genuine second act, built together. By year 5, Whitman and Daughter Catering had become one of the most requested corporate catering companies in the region, with a client list that included several companies Claire had once dreamed of working for in her old marketing career. She had rebuilt not just a business, but an entire identity, brick by brick, contract by contract, refusing every single time to let one man's opinion of her be the final chapter. That same year, her parents mentioned, almost offhandedly over dinner, that they were considering downsizing. The family house had become too much to maintain, and their retirement savings, generous as they were, could use the boost of a sale. Claire, without hesitation, made them an offer that stunned them both into silence. She would buy the house herself, and they could stay in it for as long as they wanted, rent-free, for the rest of their lives. Her mother cried at the dinner table, the same way she had cried on the drive home 5 years earlier, except this time, the tears were entirely different. "You were supposed to need us," Linda said through tears, "and instead you became the reason we get to stay in our own home." Claire took her mother's hand and said quietly, "You gave me the room to fall apart. The least I can do is give you a home to never have to leave." The papers were signed 2 months later. Claire Whitman, 34 years old, once a woman who had moved back into her childhood bedroom believing her life was effectively over, now legally owned the house she had once returned to in defeat. She kept her old bedroom exactly as it was, faded yellow wallpaper and all, and used it as a quiet retreat whenever the business grew overwhelming. She never remarried, though she dated occasionally, always with a clarity and self-respect she hadn't possessed at 23. She told the women in her Rebuild Sundays group often, "I'm not successful despite my divorce. I'm successful partly because of everything that divorce forced me to rebuild from the ground up, on my own terms, for the first time in my adult life." If you are sitting somewhere right now, feeling like moving back home, starting over, or admitting a relationship has failed makes you somehow less than you used to be, please hear this clearly. Starting over is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the exact moment your real story finally begins, once every voice that shrank you has finally gone quiet. Claire's childhood bedroom, the one she once cried in at 29, believing her life was over, became the very place where she quietly rebuilt into the woman who could buy her own parents a home. Your lowest room, your hardest season, your most humbling return to a place you thought you'd outgrown, it might not be your ending at all. It might simply be the room where your rebuilding begins. If this story moved you, hit subscribe to Grace Talk TV for more powerful, real stories about starting over, rebuilding, and becoming the woman you were always capable of being. Share this with someone who needs to hear that starting over is not failure, it's the beginning of their strongest chapter yet.